Some threats don't roar, they whisper. They travel in a cough, a sip of water, a single bite. Then suddenly an entire city starts acting like it heard a ghost story and believed it. Today, we're counting down the top 10 most haunting diseases that have terrified people across the globe, from number 10 to number 1. And yes, it gets darker as we go. This is history, not horror tourism. The goal here is to understand what people lived through, how fear spread alongside illness, and why modern public health matters. We're not glorifying suffering, and we're not giving anyone how-to details. Alright, lights low, curiosity high, let's begin. Number 10. Rabies. The bite that starts a clock. Rabies has been feared for centuries, across continents, because it doesn't feel like a big pandemic disease until it suddenly becomes intensely personal. Historically, it's shown up wherever humans and animals share space: villages, cities, farms, street corners. And the victims weren't kings or generals, often just regular people who had one unlucky encounter. The terrifying part is the uncertainty. A bite, a scratch, maybe it didn't even break the skin, and suddenly your mind starts narrating the worst-case scenario like it's trying out for a disaster movie. Communities created legends around mad dogs and cursed bites, because fear loves a simple story. There are old accounts of towns treating suspected exposure like a public emergency, less because everyone understood the science, and more because the reputation of rabies traveled faster than facts. Dark humor moment? Rabies is basically the disease version of, "You sure that was nothing?" Except history taught people that nothing sometimes became everything. Transition. But as primal as that fear is, the next one didn't come from one bite, it came in waves. And it targeted children. Number 9. Polio summers, when playgrounds went silent. In the early to mid-20th century, polio became a seasonal dread in many places, especially in the United States and parts of Europe. People talked about polio season the way you'd talk about storms. You couldn't see it coming, but you could feel it in the way adults suddenly looked worried. The historical setting is almost cruel in its normality: kids riding bikes, public pools, summer camps, and then, abruptly, closures. Parents kept children inside, not because they had clear instructions, but because fear turns any open door into a threat. Polio didn't just scare people medically, it scared them socially. A healthy neighborhood could feel unsafe overnight. Families would scan headlines, listen to radio updates, and trade rumors like they were survival tools. One of the most memorable symbols of polio in public memory became hospital wards filled with breathing machines, images that shaped an entire generation's sense of vulnerability. The bitter irony? Summer is supposed to be freedom. Polio turned it into suspicion. Transition. And if polio made communities fearful, the next disease did something even worse. It made people treat the sick like they weren't people anymore. Number 8. Leprosy, the long exile. For much of history, leprosy wasn't just a disease, it was a social sentence. In medieval Europe, parts of Asia, and many other regions, people with visible signs of illness could be pushed out of society, forced into isolation, or made to live on the margins. The fear wasn't only about transmission. It was about what the illness represented: impurity, punishment, bad luck, divine judgment, whatever story a culture could attach to the unknown. The punishment often happened before any diagnosis: whispers, avoidance, the sudden way friends stopped making eye contact. Entire colonies were created to separate people, sometimes under the logic of protection, sometimes under the cruelty of stigma. There are records and histories of leper houses and segregated settlements that lasted for generations, proof that fear can become architecture. Dark humor, but sad. It's the only illness that came with an unofficial instruction manual titled, "How to Abandon Someone Politely." Transition. But exile is slow. The next one could move fast, because it didn't need touch, it only needed water. Number 7. Cholera. Fear in the water. Cholera's horror is simple. It turns the most basic requirement for life, water, into something suspicious. In the 19th century, cholera pandemics traveled globally, with the first widely documented pandemic beginning in 1817 and later waves spreading across continents. Epidemic. The setting is often a crowded city, rapid growth, poor sanitation, and a population that doesn't yet understand what's happening. People watched neighbors fall ill quickly, and the mind did what it always does. It searched for someone to blame. Immigrants, the poor, bad air, moral failure. Cholera outbreaks often came with outbreaks of accusation. Then came a turning point in public health history. Investigators began linking cases to contaminated water sources, helping shift the world away from superstition and toward evidence-based prevention. Cholera didn't just create fear of illness, it created fear of infrastructure. A well, a pump, a river, a glass on a table, suddenly everything looked like a gamble. Transition. But if cholera was fear in the water, the next one was fear in the air, quiet, slow, and famously misunderstood. Number 6. Tuberculosis. The slow thief of breath. Tuberculosis has haunted humanity for thousands of years, and in the 1800s it became so common in some places that it shaped culture. People called it consumption, and artists wrote about it with tragic romance, because when a society can't stop something, it sometimes tries to poeticize it. The historical backdrop is industrial cities, dense housing, factories, soot, long working hours, undernutrition. TB thrived where life was already hard. It didn't arrive like a lightning strike, it lingered, and it wore people down. What made TB psychologically terrifying was the slow-motion uncertainty. Families could live with it in the home, hoping it would improve, then realizing the decline was continuing. It was the kind of sickness that made time feel heavier. There are famous examples in literature and history of poets, writers, and public figures fading from the disease. Stories that turned TB into both a medical reality and a cultural symbol of fragility. Dark humor? TB is the ultimate, I'm fine, really, disease. Until history reminds you that, fine, can be a long goodbye. Transition. Now, let's leave the slow burn behind, because the next one triggered fear so fast it could empty streets overnight. Number 5. Ebola. The outbreak that shut down a world. Ebola was first identified in 1976, and since then, outbreaks have appeared periodically, often with intense local disruption and global alarm. CDC. The setting is usually not a sprawling metropolis, it's often communities where healthcare resources are stretched, and where rumors can move as fast as any virus. Ebola terrifies for two reasons: it feels dramatic, and it feels sudden. During major outbreaks, especially the 2014 to 2016 West Africa epidemic, the world watched in real time as fear affected borders, airports, and public behavior far beyond the outbreak zones. CDC. But the most haunting part isn't movie-style danger. It's the social breakdown. People afraid to help, afraid to gather, afraid to mourn the way they normally would. Communities had to rewrite daily life in the middle of grief and uncertainty. A real-world lesson from Ebola is that outbreaks aren't only biological events, they're trust events. When trust collapses, everything gets worse. Transition. And speaking of the whole world watching in real time, the next disease didn't just change towns or regions. It changed everyone's calendar. Number 4. COVID-19. The year the world paused. COVID-19 entered public awareness at the end of December 2019, when a cluster of pneumonia cases was reported in Wuhan and a novel coronavirus was identified. To Chuck White, the joy. And what followed became a global shared experience almost nobody had trained for emotionally. The fear wasn't only about illness, it was about uncertainty multiplying everywhere at once: empty shelves, closed schools, quiet airports, daily updates that felt like weather reports from the edge of the world. What made COVID uniquely haunting in modern memory is how it invaded routine. A handshake became a question. A cough became a headline. Time itself got weird, days blurred, months disappeared, and the phrase, "back to normal," became a moving target. And because the crisis was global, it produced a rare kind of solidarity and conflict at the same time: mutual aid and misinformation, gratitude and burnout, heroism and exhaustion, often in the same week. Dark humor? COVID made everyone a part-time epidemiologist and a full-time overthinker. Transition. But as world-changing as COVID was, the next one had a longer reign of terror, and it left a signature that history couldn't ignore. Number 3. Smallpox. The scars of an empire killer. For centuries, smallpox was one of humanity's most feared diseases because it didn't just spread. It marked societies. It shaped politics, colonization, war, and public health. The key historical milestone is almost unbelievable. The last known natural case was in 1977. And in 1980, the World Health Organization declared smallpox eradicated, the only human infectious disease to achieve that status. Before eradication, outbreaks could rip through cities and villages alike. And people lived with the knowledge that survival didn't always mean escaping consequences. Families carried the memory of who got sick, who didn't, and who never fully returned to normal. There are countless real stories, from royal families to everyday households, where smallpox altered the line of succession, public policy, and personal identity. It forced governments to take vaccination seriously long before public health became a modern phrase. Dark humor. Carefully. Smallpox was history's way of saying, "You want a reminder that you're not in control?" And then public health answered, "Actually, we're going to try." Transition. But if smallpox was visible, the next fear was often invisible, and what terrified people most wasn't only the illness, it was how society reacted. Number 2. HIV, AIDS. The invisible plague of stigma. In the early 1980s, a mysterious illness appeared in medical reports, and on June 5, 1981, the CDC published what is widely recognized as the first official report of cases linked to what would later be called AIDS. CDC. The setting wasn't medieval streets or crowded ships, it was modern hospitals, modern cities, modern science, and yet, fear exploded anyway, because when people don't understand something, they fill the gap with judgment. HIV/AIDS became haunting not only because of lives lost, but because of how stigma acted like a second disease. People were abandoned by families, rejected by employers, and turned into political arguments rather than human beings. There are countless stories of activists, doctors, and communities fighting for recognition, compassion, and research, transforming grief into one of the most powerful public health movements in modern history. A key takeaway: HIV/AIDS revealed something brutal about society: how quickly fear can become cruelty when empathy is treated as optional. Transition. And now, we reach number 1, the one that still echoes in language, art, and collective memory, like the world's oldest nightmare. Number 1, the Black Death. When a continent held its breath. The Black Death tore through Europe in the mid-14th century, and even conservative historical estimates describe catastrophic loss. Encyclopedia Britannica cites a rough estimate of about 25 million deaths in Europe, with long-lasting economic and cultural shockwaves. The setting is medieval life, crowded towns, limited medical knowledge, constant travel by trade routes, and a worldview that often explained disaster through religion or superstition. When the plague arrived, it didn't just kill, it destabilized everything people believed about safety. The psychological impact was enormous. Public gatherings became frightening, normal work became dangerous, and even caregiving could feel like stepping into a shadow. People searched for meaning, scapegoats, or signs, anything to make chaos feel organized. And the Black Death reshaped society. Labor systems changed, institutions weakened or transformed, even culture, art, literature, and spiritual life shifted under the weight of what people had witnessed. Dark humor. With respect, the Black Death was history's way of pulling the fire alarm on an entire civilization. Except the building was the whole continent. Transition, final, and after everything on this list, the scariest truth is how often the real battle wasn't only the disease, it was fear itself. Looking back, it's chilling how often humanity has been haunted by the same pattern, and illness appears. Knowledge lags behind, fear fills the gap, and societies sometimes respond with courage and sometimes with cruelty. But there's a reason we study these stories, not to obsess over suffering, but to understand how far medicine, sanitation, and public health have brought us, and how empathy matters as much as science. Now I want to hear from you. Which number shocked you the most, number 10 or number 1? Drop your pick in the comments, and if you want more, dark but safe, history told with context and respect, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next countdown.